Right. Okay. Good. All right. Am I audible?
You're good. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. When Samach Estim and Aleph talking about some of the rules of avoiding ribis when it comes to the lender taking a mashkon of the borrower. The mashkon could be real property, it could be some other item. So here we're talking about a mashkon, which is real property, land. So Amavashi, Amali Sabi the Masamaxia, the elders of Masamaxia told me, Stam Mashkanta Shaso, that if the lender takes a mashkon, then it's generally assumed, at least their practice was, that he would be allowed to eat the fruit of the field for at least 1 year. The borrower would not be allowed to evict him from the field by paying up the loan prior to the year. For 1 year, he would be allowed to eat from the field. Presumably, it doesn't elaborate, but the assumption is that it was been a chiyaisa, that a certain amount would be deducted from the loan, so it wouldn't be a ribis problem. But here we're just talking about what's the minimum amount that he'd be allowed on the field. The minor kamina. So what's the nafkamina? The nafkamina is that it's considered to be sort of his property. The akil la shasa matzi misalikle, that he can only be evicted from the field by the borrower paying up the loan after he's been there for a year below. But if it has not been a full year, lo matzi misalikle, that then it's considered as if he's basically he's paid for rent, so to speak, for up to a year, and the borrower would not be allowed to get rid of him prior to the year from the land. Vashi also said, Amali Sabi the Masamaxia. The elders of Masamaxia also taught me, my Mashkanta. Why do we use the term Mashkanta to refer to the land which is presented as collateral to lender? The Shchuna Gabe, meaning that it's his residence. What do you mean? Lamayna Afkamina, for what purpose is that important to know? The Dina de Bar Mitzvah, because it affects the Din of Bar Mitzvah. A person sells a property, so the neighbor generally has the right to first dibs of the property, to say, sell it to me first at the same price before you would sell it to somebody else. So Rashi explains that this lender would have that the same right. If the borrower wanted to sell the field, the lender could say, well, I'm holding it as a mashkin and it has to be sold to me before it would be sold to somebody else. Others, like the Rambam and the Rosh, say what it simply means is that, not that he has first dibs per se, but in the event that the borrower would sell the land to the lender, so a neighbor would not have the right to say, oh, I want to assert my right of bar mitzvah to take the land away from the lender. So it only is sort of like after the fact, but not necessarily the chatchila that he would have first dibs. So Machlokas had to understand this line. Amarava, Lei Silkasa says that there are a bunch of halachas that we learned that we can establish that the halacha is not like them. Lo ketarshi papunai, not like we had a case of tarsha de Rapapa and Dapa Samachay Amar Aleph, but where Rapapa didn't really need the money up front, but he would sell like the beer for people to pay him later on at what would be the higher price in the market, not right now. And he said, I didn't need to sell it right now. It wouldn't have gone bad had it waited a long time, and I need the money right now, so it's not a problem. From my perspective, I didn't need the money up front, and therefore the fact that I'm charging a premium, that it's not because of the fact that there's any sort of a benefit from my perspective that I gave the beer right away, because I could have given the beer later, and therefore I'm not getting any special benefit. So the retort to Papa, as you may recall, is that it still is a burden for those who have to pay more later on, because if those people would have had the money right now, they could have paid at the cheaper rate, which was the market rate at the time that they're receiving the beer, and therefore it still is ribis from their perspective, and that's why we don't hold that his arrangement was a good one. Lokeshtare mechuzanai, which we'll explain, not like the contracts of mechuznai. Loka chachire narshai, and not like the chachirim of narshai. We don't hold like any of these different arrangements. Chachire means that you take land and you pay a certain amount for you are working the land that belongs to somebody for an entire year. It's like a rental of a land, regardless of how much the land is going to produce. Kitashai papunai. So the case of Tashe Papanai, we just explained and described this. Kitashi the Papa that we said was not he wasn't necessarily getting a benefit, but the people who were paying the extra money were suffering a burden, so that's why it's no good. Shtarim mechuznai, what was these special shtaros? These were the zakrile leravka akarna. This was a situation where the people would buy basically merchandise, as Rashi says, and they would. I'm sorry. Like on consignment, yes, very good. And they would make up that the merchandise will probably earn a certain amount of profit, and they would write in the star that the ones who are receiving the merchandise are going to pay the anticipated profit. Let's say they would return the value plus the anticipated profit. Let's say that it would be 5%, so they would write that, but only because it's the anticipated profit. Obviously, if the profit wouldn't be earned, then the understanding was that they wouldn't have to pay it, and that and that there would be a share by the one who is investing this with who was giving them the merchandise, that he would share in the loss. But that wasn't what was written in the star. The star just wrote what the anticipated profit was. So how do you know for sure that there would be a profit? In ISCA, the way that a joint venture is supposed to work is that if there is a loss, so the investor is supposed to share in the loss. If there's a profit, then the investor gets a share of the profit. But here, it only said the profit. So Amalei Marbar Amemer. So this was a dangerous discussion, as we will see. Mar, the son of a Maimer, said to Ravashi, the Ravashi, Abba, my father, his father was a Maimer, Abid Hachi. My father did this type of an arrangement, and he would give this out sort of with the promise of profit. The chiyasu the kamei, and the people who received if the people who had received the merchandise would come back to my father, and they would tell him that they did not make a profit, so then he wouldn't collect the money, and he would even share in the losses. So mehemen lahu, he would believe them. So Amalei, so the Ravashi said, well, that would work very well if your father is alive. That your father would believe these people if they would say that they suffered a loss. But if the star came in front of the Yisomim who wouldn't understand what the deal was, so who says that they would necessarily believe the merchants to say that they suffered a loss? So therefore, you can't have in the star simply the stipulation that a certain expected profit is going to be paid. You think about our ISCA profit contracts nowadays. You have to stipulate in them that in the event that the investors or the managing partners, the ones who are managing the investment, will assert that there was a loss, at least with an oath or with witnesses or whatever, that they're going to be believed, and then they don't have to pay the profits. So since it doesn't say that, we can't assure that the heirs to a maimer will always necessarily believe those who are managing the investment if they say that they suffered a loss. So this comment that Ravashi made was an unfortunate comment, because he said, oh, in the event that your father dies, so that since the bris kusa l'sfasayim, his words actually spoke about a maimer dying. It was like a mistake that was made, that loose lips sink ships in front of the ruler. And unfortunately, a maimer did die after that statement was made. So be careful what you say. What was the case of Chachire Narshai that is supposed to be avoided?
He supposedly accused them that only doing your father, but not the children.
Right. He said that who knows that the children will have the same level of believing the managing partners. Okay, so now the case of Chachire Narshai, the Kasvi Hachi. So they would write this with respect to the Chachirim of Narshai. Chakim, as we said, is that somebody is going to work on a field. It's sort of like a reverse rental. A person is going to work on a field for a full year, and he says that I don't know if the field's going to yield a lot or it's going to yield a little bit, but he's going to get paid 10 kurin a certain amount of yield is going to be paid to him, whether the field will do a lot or do a little bit. So essentially, what would be done in this particular case is that you had balabatim who had fields, and they would loan money to poor people, and they would take the fields of the poor people, and then they would turn around and they would say to the poor people, okay, I'm going to now give you back the field, and you have to pay me a certain amount every single year for what you're working on the field. So they were taking collateral essentially, and they're renting out the collateral to the borrowers. So they're making extra money. They're loaning money, in which they're going to get repaid, and they're also taking the collateral and getting money from the borrowers from the collateral. So that sort of looks like ribbis. The borrower gave as collateral a certain amount of land to the lender, and then he rented out that same land that he gave as collateral. So people would look at this and they would say it just looks like a ribbis because the land is really the borrower's land, and how is the lender renting out the borrower's land? It just looks like he's collecting whatever money the borrower is paying to him as an extra premium of ribbis. But nowadays, the Gemara wants to suggest the kasvi kahaki, where it says explicitly that the lender is buying the land, that essentially is reviewing the collateral like it already belongs to him. Kanina mine, shahina kame, and it's already been in the lender's possession, so people view the land as belonging to the lender. Rashi says 3 years. And only afterwards is it then given back to the borrower for renting purposes. So they have this arrangement so that it will not look like ribbis, and this way the lenders will be willing to loan the money, because otherwise, if they wouldn't be allowed to enter into this arrangement, they wouldn't loan the money, and then you would close the door in front of the borrower. So shapir dummy. So Gemara suggests that maybe this is under those circumstances, and the Gemara concludes that no, what are you talking about? Lamai said the field still belongs to the borrower, it's just collateral being given to the lender. So what's he doing? Renting it back to the borrower for money. So therefore it's not really a thing. Says the Gemara that it would still be considered to be ribbis. It's ribbis gemura. He says, okay, fine. It's considered to be ribbis gemura, because sometimes the lender is going to get money. The yield is not going to produce any produce, so it's just going to be pure ribbis. Okay, says the Mishnah. So when you have an iskas investment, which means that you have an investing partner that we might otherwise call a lender, and you have a managing partner whom we might otherwise call a borrower, but it's a joint venture, and the investing partner is going to share in the profits and the losses. So it says, "Ein moshivin chenbani lamachatz sakar." You're not allowed to simply have, let's say, a person has payros, and he says that I'm going to give to you some merchandise, okay, and I want you to sell it at a profit because you are a chenbani, you're a retailer, and you're going to be able to make more profit than I would make. I'm a wholesaler, so I want you to go and sell it at a profit, and we're simply going to split in the profits, and we're going to split in the losses. Why is that not okay? Because of the fact that we say that half of the venture is considered to be a loan, and half of the venture is considered to be a deposit. So since there is work that's being done by the retailer, in which he's going to then split his profits if he makes any with a wholesaler, the investor who's giving him the merchandise, we say he's doing work for the wholesaler, for the investor, in return for the fact that part of this is going to be a loan. Part of it is going to be considered to be his money, because that's why he's splitting in the profits. The half that he splits. Right, but the half of that he's going to be getting, that the retailer, the merchant is going to be getting, will be for the portion of the funds that belongs to him. That's considered to be a loan, and he's responsible to pay back that portion. Half of it, no matter what happens, he's going to have to pay back. So in return for the half of the investment that's a loan, he's doing work. He's doing the investing. He's doing all of the work, and he's not getting paid for it. Okay, so that's the problem. The problem is simply that he's not getting paid his schar tircha. If he gets paid, so then it's not a problem. Lo yitain most, and on the flip side of the equation, if it's not the merchandise that's being given over, but money is being given over to somebody in order to invest in the market to buy merchandise, and they're going to split the profits. They come and pay us the machatz iskar, and they'll split the profits and the losses. So that can't be done, because the one who's going to be doing all the work is doing the work in return for the fact that he's at least partially receiving a loan, because every joint venture is considered to be half a loan and half a pikadon, and half a deposit. If he loses everything, he still has to pay half to the investor. So therefore, half of it is a loan. He has to get, and he's doing work for free in return for a loan. That's ribis. Rather, the one who's giving the merchandise or giving the money has to pay the one who's going to be doing all the work. He has to pay him like a worker. How much does he have to pay him? That's the discussion in the Gemara. We know that nowadays the way that a heteris works is that you can get away with paying the person $1. Say you give $1 for their efforts, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged price, but right now in the Mishnah, he says he gets paid like a worker. Ein Moshibin Tarnagol in the Mechza. Similarly, if a person, let's say, has eggs, and he's going to give eggs to a person or the second person who owns the chicken, and he says to the person who owns the chicken, I want you to put your chicken on my eggs, and we're going to split the profits of the eggs, and also any losses. We'll share in the losses as well. So it's the same idea. We don't do that. Ain't shaman unless the person who owns the chicken is going to get paid for his efforts. He has to get paid something. Ain't shaman agalanu sayachim lemachza. And similarly, if a person is giving their calves or their foals to somebody in order for them to have children, and they're going to split sort of the offspring that are going to be born, and they'll split any losses as well. We don't do that either unless it's going to be proper payment. Ve'ein ashamin agalim usayachim le. I did that. We just did that. Ve'ein shamin agalim agalim usayachim maxi elimkein nosin los karamalo mizono. Unless the person who's giving the animals over is going to pay the one who's raising and breeding them for his work and for the mizonos that he has to pay them. About mekablin, yes.
So it's not going to be half. It's going to be whatever. The seller will be
the one. It's going to be half and half, but the one who's selling it is going to have to also pay something for the efforts of the one who's going to be doing the breeding and the raising. About mekablin, agalin usayachim lemechza. However, you can accept a sort of very small agolim and siyachim who are going to earn their keep, so to speak. If they're going to earn their keep, until they are mishulashin, meaning until they are 1/3 grown. And a chamor, a donkey, up until it's going to be able to carry burdens and so forth. So if there is going to be a benefit that the person is receiving from them, that he's going to be able to put these animals to work and things like that. So then we say that would be essentially the equivalent of his being paid. So then that would constitute the payment that we say, okay, so that's the payment that he'd be allowed to use this donkey to carry his burdens and things of that sort. Okay, so the Gemara says, Tana Kipo Batel. So what's the amount of the payment? It's Kipo Batel, meaning that if the one who's doing all the work, breeding the animals or investing with the fruits of the merchandise or whatever, normally would get paid $100,000. And now they're not going to be able to do, because they're a lawyer, and now they're not going to be able to work as a lawyer because they're busy doing all of this stuff. So then we make an evaluation, according to the way Tosfos learns, the whole discussion of how much would they be willing to take in order that they would not be doing their regular job, and they'd be sitting and just not doing anything all day. So that's Kippur Batel. Normally, says the Taz in Shulchan Aruch, says that we normally evaluate Kippur Batel as 50% of what a person's wages would otherwise be. So my Kippur Batel, so I'm Abaye, Kippur Batel shel osa melacha de batel mina. So Abaye, the top of Samachtes Amid Beis, says that we evaluate how much would a person be willing to take not to do what their normal work would be. They're normally a carpenter, says Rashi, or they're normally a glass blower, or whatever the profession is. So if it's an easy profession, so then you don't have to pay them as much to not do what they normally do. If it's a hard profession, then if it's a hard profession, so then they're happy not to do it. So therefore, you don't have to pay them as much. If it's an easy profession, so then you might have to pay them some more. And so this is necessary. And if they're making a lot of money, so then you have to pay them more in order to convince them not to do their job. If they're not making a lot of money, then you don't have to pay them as much in order to convince them not to do their job. So we have to have all the cases in our Mishnah. Why do we need all the cases in our Mishnah? If we only have the case of Chenbani who desagi like a Pol Batel, and Chenbani can get paid simply like a Pol Batel will say, okay, we'll pay him half of what he normally makes, because if you're giving him the merchandise, it's just selling the merchandise, it's not a lot of work. about most, but you're giving somebody money and he has to go out to the market and figure out which merchandise to buy, and that's more work. Most likach ben payos, the nafish tirche, he has to work much harder. I might think that you have to pay him a higher premium, maybe something more similar to what he would normally make in his regular profession. So that's why we have to say in the Mishnah that kipoel batel is good enough in either case. And if I would have been in the other direction, I would have said that when you give money to somebody to buy merchandise, that's a very hard work. I would have thought only in that case do you have to pay him as much as a pole bottom. But if you only just but if you're giving a person actual merchandise just to sell, not so hard. He's just selling the merchandise that he already has. So then I might thought it'd be sufficient if you just give him a tiny little bit, which Lamaisa is our practice, if that's what's stipulated up front. You just let the person take his sushi and dip it in your soy sauce. That'll be good enough. Or you're eating a bunch of dried figs and you give him one of that, like you have a bowl of walnuts and you give him a walnut, so that would be good enough. And anything at all, just a token payment, I might think would be good enough. That's why we say kipol batel, meaning that if it's not stipulated otherwise, you have to pay the person kipol batel, which is a much more a strict salary, a much more hefty salary. But if you do stipulate, so we paskin in Shulchan Aruch, if you stipulate up front, I want you to do all this investing for me, I'm only going to pay you $1 for it, that is good enough. And that's why in every single heteriska, it says that every single heteriska says, I'm giving the money to this person, we're going to split in the profits, we're going to split in the losses, and I'm paying the person $1 for his tircha. And it's very important that that dollar get paid over. It doesn't have to be $1. It could simply be that if we have profits, we'll split it 50-50. And if there are losses, then I will incur 2/3 of the losses. Or we might say, if there are losses, we'll split it 50-50. And if there are profits, then the person who's actually managing the investment will get 2/3 of the profits. That's another way of doing it. So the one who's managing it gets the better sort of part of the bargain in return for the fact that he's managing the investment. So here we have a Numanik, Kami Isik Tanagol Malansim. Tanamabanim. Kamu Skaro. How much is the schar that gets paid to the person who's managing the investment? So he gets a certain amount of schar, says Rabbi Meir, whether he makes a lot or whether he makes a little bit, and it doesn't have to be a lot. Okay, and Rabbi Yehuda goes even further, because according to Rabbi Meir, you have to have like some sort of a stipulation of a certain amount of money. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, even if there's no stipulation of money, you just do like a certain favor for the person. I feel like we mentioned earlier, you let the person take their sushi and dip it in your soy sauce. Or you give to a person a nut because you're eating a bag of nuts, or the dried a fig in this case. That would be good enough. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So Rashi says Rabbi Yehuda is more makel. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says nothing doing. Omer no sin lo schara mushlam. You got to pay the full amount of what a poel batel will make. The person's a lawyer. That they make $100,000, you got to, and now they're going to be managing your investments. You have to pay them $50,000, so that they don't have to, work as hard as they would as a lawyer. But how much would they pay? How much would they insist on getting paid if they don't? If they're going to give up making their livelihood? So whatever that is, let's say 50%. So Tana Rabbanan ain't sham in laws isim laws of achelim local davash elsa ve'ochel lemechza. That we don't make a sort of an evaluation that I'm going to give over sort of my goats and sheep, that I'm going to have somebody breed, and that these are things that are not going to do any work for him. So he's not going to get any benefit from them. He has to work and breed them, and now we're going to share in the offspring and the profits and the losses. So we can't do that unless I pay him something. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Shomin is the Eason. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, where it says no, I can just give him goats without having to pay him, because I can tell him you can keep the milk. That the goats are going to produce a certain amount of milk, and the one who's managing the investment is breeding the goats, that he'll get to keep all of the milk. And as far as the sheep, so we'll let him keep all the shearings. Bishotros or mortos, and also if they go into water and the wool comes off, they get to keep that water. If they go into thorn bushes and the wool comes off, they get to keep that wool. So therefore, they get all of those benefits. Besatanagolis, neshi osa belchelis, and the chicken as well. So the chicken is going to hatch various eggs, and that are not necessarily going to be fertilized, and it gets to keep those eggs too. The Tanakama says what? This is so the Tanakama said you're not allowed to rely upon that. Why can't you rely upon that? So he says because as far as the shearings of the sheep are concerned, the giza of the chalav and the milk of the goats are concerned, they're not going to be enough. They don't add up to the amount of hard labor that it takes in terms of the breeding of these animals and the food and the feed that has to be given to these animals on a regular basis. That's why he holds that it's not enough. The giza, the chalav, kuli ama, lo pligi, that they don't disagree that in the event that there would be an agreement that the person who's working it would get the kisa and the challah, that probably would be sufficient. That's not what they're arguing about. What they're arguing about is that if the one who's giving over the animals insists that he wants to share in the milk and share in the shearings, and the only thing that he's going to give over to the one who's doing the work is benisyobi betusri, that's where they disagree. What's the nisyobi? That's little Miss Muffet. You get the curds in the way. So the one who's doing the work with the animals is only going to get the way, the nisyobi. So so according to the Tanakama, no way, that the way is not considered to be enough. It's not going to be justify all of the work and all of the feed that he has to provide. And similarly, with respect to Tosri is only kind of like the remnants that fall off in terms of when you're when you're plucking away at the shearings, so there's like a little bit that falls off and remains on the ground. So only that little bit that falls off and remains on the ground, the nosa, the tosri, only that would go to the managing partner. So the Tanakama says that's not enough. Rabbi Yosef says that is enough. Tanakama says like Rabbi Shimon Yochai, that you have to give something which is more respectable. It can't just be a token amount. Rabbi Yosef he holds like his father, even a token amount that is given to, if that's what the parties agree upon anyway, that's given to the managing partner, even if it doesn't justify all of the labor per se, is also considered to be good enough. Even if it's a tiny little bit, just a dried fig that's given over. So even if it's the remnants of the shearings or just the whey that is extracted from the milk, that would be good enough. A woman can give can work out basically with, let's say she has a tarnagolas, she has a chicken. She's allowed to say to her neighbor who has a couple of beitzim, she could say, "Give me the beitzim, and I will place my chicken upon your eggs, and I'm going to breed, the chicks that will come, and I will accept the 2 chickens that will be my sakar. That's what I'm going to get paid, is 2 chickens, and I'm going to do all this work for you." So that's like a regular scheme. That's not a joint venture. So that's okay. That she can say. She says, "I want to get paid 2 chicks for all the work that I'm going to do." That's fine. However, if there's going to be sort of like a joint venture is a different arrangement. It's my chicken, beitzim shelichi, and it's your eggs. Let's enter into a joint venture. If we're going to do that, so then Rabbi Yehuda Matir, Rabbi Yehuda says that this is also good enough because of the fact that she's going to get some sort of a benefit from it. So it's like she's getting paid for her labors, even though we view it as like a half loan, a half pikadon situation. Rabbi Shimon says, no. She has to get paid a full wage for what she's doing. Rabbi Yehuda but even Rabbi Yehuda requires that she get paid like a tiny little bit for the work that she's doing in feeding the livestock and all of the efforts that she has to toil away doing. So yes, she gets something. She gets, as we mentioned earlier, ika beitzin muzoros. She gets the unfertilized eggs that are not going to turn into chicks. So that will be the payment that she's getting for her labor, and then they can enter into this joint venture type of arrangement. Whenever there is the person who's receiving the animal, and they're going to breed the animal, and then the parties are going to split the offspring or they split the profits and the losses. The animals die, so they'll split those losses as well. So we have this type of a joint venture arrangement. So one of the things that the person who's doing the work with the animals has to do is in terms of lifting the animals and so forth. So whenever there's a minhag that there's an extra amount that has to get paid for all of the lifting and the carrying, that the person who's doing the breeding has to do, so that has to get paid. Malin. And you can't go away from the minig medina, so they can't say, oh, well, between the two of us, it's good enough if you just give me $1. No, if the minig is that the person who's doing the work has to get the carrying cost, so to speak, so then he has to be paid that full amount of cost. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Shamin Egalim Mimo. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that if there is a sort of a mother-child combination that's given, so then we say that the mother will take care of the child. So you have a cow with a calf, so then there doesn't have to be the payment of carrying costs because the mother will take care of her own calf. The Sayachi Mimo, where you have a pony together with a horse, so the horse will take care of the pony. A horse and pony show. Even if it's a place where normally the person who is breeding the animals gets paid for carrying them, here we assume that the mother will take care of the offspring. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, but what do you mean? That's going to be good enough according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and there's no additional payment that needs to be rendered? He doesn't require that the managing partner who's breeding the animals get paid at least something, so it wouldn't look like it's ribbis. So we say, yeah, he gets paid the dung, he gets the fertilizer, whatever is the excrement that comes from the horses and from the other animals, it's worth a lot of money. You can use that as fertilizer. Ika galalim, the idak galalim afkuri mafkir lahu. However, the other shita that says that this would not be good enough, namely the Tanakama, that holds that you got to get paid more than that, holds that the fertilizer, the excrement of the animals doesn't really count for anything because that's considered to be hefker to everyone. Amar of Nax is not as if a person who gave over the animals is giving that over Scott because it was hefker. Amar of Nachman, halakha to Rabbi Yehuda. The halakha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that only a little bit has to be paid. That's why now we had to risk because they stipulate that $1 can be paid for all of the efforts that are going to be carried out by the managing partner who's managing the investment. That's good enough. Halakha to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and we hold like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda as well, that you can rely upon the milk that comes out of the goats and the shearings that come out of the rechelim, even if it's the only way, and even if it's only the remnants of the shearings. The halakha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that we can assume that if a mother and calf are given over together, that the mother takes care of the calf, and you don't have to pay for additional carrying costs. B'nei Rav Ilish, the children of Rav Ilish, after Rav Ilish died, so it turned out that their father had entered into an agreement where he was managing an investment, but didn't seem like he was getting paid for it. What did the shtar say? It said that he was given a certain amount of money. It said that they're going to split the profits, and that there will be a split of the hefseid as well. According to Tosas, it said something like palga be'aga ube hefseid. So the question was, if they're splitting the profits and splitting the losses, it sounds like he's not getting paid anything for his efforts, which would seem like a ribbis problem. So Amar Rava, Rav Ilish Gavarabahu. Rava said Rav Ilish was a great man. There's no way in the world that he would have entered into an investment where he's paying ribbis to individuals because he's not getting paid for his efforts for the share of what he's getting that constitutes a loan. He must have gotten paid. So it must be that we're going to have to reinterpret the shtar. We had a case like this in the past where the parties, entered into a transaction, a loan transaction with interest, and there was no heter iska. So I remember one of the towing, or one of the parties has said, well, look at the story of Rav Ilish. They're both like from people. There's no way that would have been what we meant. Of course, it must be that we intended that there be a heter iska. We said, I'm sorry, Rav Ilish. Well, ma nafshach, we say that there's a ma nafshach over here. What he must have meant was, if they're splitting the profits 50-50, so that meant that the investor who was giving over the money was going to assume 2/3 of any loss. And if they were sharing the losses 50-50, it meant that the one who is receiving the investment, namely Rav Ilish, Trey Tilsi Ba'aga, would be receiving 2/3 of the profits, so that he would be getting a premium for his efforts. And we'll stop here.
How about the other guy? One that got 1/3? Does he work less?